Live at
It's live.
Okay, well, let's get started. Mitch, unfortunately, out of Victoria, is not able to join us. He's trying, but he's not getting the email. If somebody knows how to, he wants it to go to Mitch at bigsurffilms.com. I've sent it twice. It's not going through. Let's get started. So welcome, everybody. It's a little bit of a reunion from 2 years ago, Flipper, and Jill and Stephen and I were in China, in Nanchang.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it's been 2 years, but here we are. So
I know.
I thought it'd be a great idea to do the winter ops discussion, and we'll let this go as long as it goes. If it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. If we have questions and it goes on for longer, then awesome. Dan Booker, thanks for joining us. I got to tell you, I flew this morning, went out to lunch out to near Mojave, and not in Mojave, but here in LA, it is right now 90 degrees in the afternoon, and it was 92 earlier, and the skies look not like this background. The skies are absolutely clear, not a cloud in them. So it's absolutely gorgeous. But Booker, I know, Hole, you're in Michigan, so you guys do get a little bit of colder temperatures, so I'm glad you're joining us. And what I thought we would do is I would just kind of kick this off, and we've got a couple, renowned, very experienced mechanics in Keith and Jill maintaining our aircraft and our airplanes with Husais and M14s and AI-14s and on Wilgas and all that kind of stuff. And so we'd pick your brains, and all you guys kind of tell us. And we also have Stephen Hayne, who lives in Colorado. They get their share of snow, I've heard, sometimes there as well. Although his airplane is right now at my airport sitting at 90 degrees, enjoying a warm summer. So, hey, I see Mitch is actually joining in. Awesome. So let me kick this off. This is kind of what I'd like to get through, which is the things I think our members are thinking about. Little talk about the oil weights. What oil should we be using? And talking about oil heating. Should we preheat our oils before we fly? What is a pre-oiler? Okay. And that oil dilute switch, is that something we should ever use? We have that. And then we could talk a little bit about starting motors in the cold weather. Then we can get into the cabin, talk about cabin heaters, how to make sure we don't carbon monoxide ourselves to death. So Mitch, we see you now. Hey, buddy.
Hello.
Up in Pacific Northwest, they don't get as much snow necessarily, but down in Victoria, but up in the mountains where you fly, you certainly do. So I'm the only one who's sitting here in 90-degree weather. So let's kick this off, and I'm going to have Professor Stephen keep an eye on the Facebook page where this is live streaming, and report to us with questions and comments that we get from everyone who's watching this. So welcome aboard. And why don't I actually start it off with Keith and Jill. Why don't you start off, Keith, a little bit of what your thoughts on some of these topics, but let's talk about, and I'd love to hear from all of you. So let's talk about oil weights. Is that something we need to be considerate of now as we go into winter?
Well, I think it definitely is. We use 2560 year round, but I won't start my engine if it's below 32. So that's sort of my draw the line without any kind of a preheat, and still getting it started at 32 is going to be tough. But 2560 is what we use here, season year round. And, if you had to get it started, I think you can sometimes, but it's always best. One, put it in the heated hangar. Two, never use the oil dilution switch unless Jill can help me out with that one, because not on my engine.
Yeah.
I know they do, but I think that's a government deal, and they overhaul the engines at 500 hours. So yeah, sure. Dilute it down and get the thing started, and it will dissipate out of the system, but we disconnect them out here. So no oil dilution switch. The other thing is if you are going to put a heat pads on, be sure you put it on the tank and the oil sump, the one down between 5 and 6, that sump down there below. So
I got
those,
a little story to add on that. We get some pretty cold temperatures up here, and I made the mistake early on in flying my yak. It was about 10 degrees out, and I installed the oil pad heater on my main oil tank and my oil sump. I cranked up the plane, and as always, really cold. I watched my oil temperature drop down as the bypass valve opened, and I sat there for a few minutes, and everything was looking normal. I taxied off, and I tried to cycle my prop, and nothing was happening. And I looked behind me, and I saw oil all over the ramp. So the mistake or the lesson learned is that oil coming from your oil cooler in the wing does not get preheated.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I blew the hose right at the firewall, and you don't know because your oil temperature gauge is reading almost zero to begin with. So if you're going to use oil pads to heat and not just a warm hanger, I have a third pad on my oil tank cooler in the wing. I heat all 3, and I've never had that problem since then.
I would agree.
And that
That's
was
a
a question.
Very
good point. Very good point, Dan. And you're lucky that you only blew a hose. So I've got an oil cooler here. That's what happens when you blow the cooler. So you lucked out cheap. And there's a misconception that that's a temperature bypass on the oil cooler. It is not. It's a pressure. So that's what happens when that oil is cooled and congealed. I guess I could segue into what we use out here for oils. I don't want to throw the gauntlet down on Phillips 25W60. What we use is the straight weight aero shells. And as it moves into winter, we use W100. Out here in the desert in the summertime, I think most people are using the W120, across the country when it gets warmer. So that's what we do use. And right now we're into temperatures of 65 to 70 degrees. You can see over here, we've got it's actually an AI 14 that's going to be test run tomorrow. And we run into the same issues on the test stand with keeping everything nice and warm. And we'll wait, and we actually will drag our test stand into our shop and keep the engine warm in there overnight before we pull it out for a test run. But we do pull the oil out, and it's not unheard of for people to actually drain the complete oil tank and put it somewhere warm if they've got an office in their shop that's heated and warm it that way. Am I timed out, Gil?
No.
Okay. So the preheat pads definitely, like Dan and Keith were saying, the oil cooler, the sump, the oil tank, some of the brands that are available, Easy Heat. He's actually a Yak owner, out of Tech, but you can get that off of Aircraft Spruce. I was pricing that out for you guys in about $165 for a pad. Tanis makes some preheat pads. They're a little pricier. I actually just researching for today, they've got one for a radial engine, not these, but that's like $3,500 for a whole system. We use a company called Watlow, WATLOW.com. They've got offices in Riverside, California, and they will make heat pads for almost any size, shape. We worked with them on Carl's Stearman back there with the M14P and put some preheat pads on. And on that, it was pretty specific on the adhesive that you use to put those preheat pads on. So that's one thing I wanted to address that we see coming into the shop. when these preheat pads are put on, you want to make sure that that surface, one, that the paint underneath is not coming loose and flaking off. You need a good, clean surface to start with, not oily. Make sure it's if there's paint on it, you might scuff that paint up if it's in good condition, and then put your preheat pad on. Very, very important. Another thing that we've encountered, we had one customer that put in a preheat system, and the wiring, we don't think a whole lot about the wiring for these systems. The way that he had it wired, the wiring on that preheat shorted out and actually started a fire in the engine area because it burned through a hose. So just when you're installing that, quality workmanship, safety, make sure everything's secured, that kind of thing.
Can I ask the question?
Yeah.
Was it, sorry, Gail, just per the, was it a heat differential between the tank heat and the sump heat going into the oil cooler that caused the hose separation?
No, it was that the oil down there at the oil cooler just was not heated through enough. Yeah, there was a temperature differential, but it couldn't move because, and it's the pressure and the bypass on the oil cooler that's the problem.
Right. So just per Dan and yourself, Jill, it's wise to put a single pad on the oil cooler itself, correct?
Correct. I actually asked Carl to join our discussion here this afternoon, and he said, I don't need to. I can tell you what I would say, and that is cold weather, don't fly. He's a California boy, so.
So let me ask you, so Dan and Mitch, you guys are both flying in cold weather. Are either of you using a forced air heater at all? Because I've seen some of that.
I'll go after you.
I have both. I don't have as much success with the forced air heater with the yak cowling. You got to cover up so much stuff. And I've used big packing blankets and just throw them over the gap. And that seems to work pretty well. On the oil pads, one thing I'd like to add, I've seen a couple guys burn theirs off too. They've routed their electrical cords near the muffler or some other sloppy type of work. But another one that catches you, and this happened to me, was I used two different sizes of heating pads. And of course they draw different currents, and I spliced them together for the exit so I don't have to plug in one. I'm not exactly sure as an electrical engineer what exactly happened, but something happened and the bigger one was drawing so much more, it was starting to overheat the actual cord going to it. So I went to just using the same size pads. That way they have an equal draw on the electricity when they run their distance. And the other thing is, use a high temperature bead of silicone around the edge of the pad. Don't just use any old silicone because they'll burn off too. So, but the forced air blanket thing is great. I don't really fly anymore when it's below 0 Fahrenheit. When it's below about 30 is when I start worrying about cold weather ops. And once you're down in the low 30s, it's time to preheat.
Yeah. I use the Aerotherm. I did a little tutorial that's on the Registrar tutorial website, YouTube channel, and I just reversed it and came in the back of the financial cowl, cut little crescents and put them on either side. And then I upgraded and got Bruce's one of Bruce's thermal cowl covers, and I bundled that thing around there and closed the flaps. And man, it's snug as a bug. I mean, the other day November 11th was our Remembrance Day flight around here, and I couldn't get with the guys because of weather, so I flew local. And man, I was down like 22 atmos, and I was like, okay, here we go. And she fired up like a summer's day with that preheat and the oil pads, which I am going to add now to my cooler with your Intel guys. But yeah, anything below 5 degrees Celsius or around there, which is 41 degrees Fahrenheit, I do the forced air Aerotherm system with the cowl cover. And I almost always do oil preheat, any kind of weather.
So let me ask something. So we're talking about preheating with either, forced air or an electrical pad. How do you know that it's warm enough? How long does this take? Do you have to put it on the night before you fly? Do you put it on for an hour? Let me know.
Dan, you want to go first again?
You just kind of get some experience. Some guys will plug in the pads the night before. They don't take that long. I usually will run over, plug things in, then go have breakfast or lunch, leave them on for a couple hours, and then they've had a chance to warm up the oil. Then the oil actually transmits the heat throughout the system, and things get pretty warm.
Yeah, I've thought about getting a SIM card activated remote switch and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't think I want something running in the hangar without my eyes on it. So I do about 40 minutes time to do my walk around and get my flight suit on and that kind of stuff for both of them. Half an hour to 40 minutes. I don't really have a temperature setting or gauge. I find the pads kind of self-regulate themselves, and my Aerotherm has a thermal cutout. It seems to just go intermittent enough to really keep it snug and warm.
Cool. I never heard about putting a pad on the oil cooler in the under the fuselage. Totally makes sense, but I'd never heard about it. So I'm glad that we're talking about that, because that thing will hold, including in the hoses, quite a lot of oil, I guess. And that oil is cold and really, really viscous, right? So.
Yeah, good note.
Yeah.
So another area that people don't really consider is the prop hub. And I give you another little visual. This is the skull cap off the prop, original prop. And if you look in there, this is pretty grubby. It's lined with about 1/4 inch thick felt. And that's lined with that felt for insulating purposes, because you think about it, there's a lot of oil in that piston and dome, and when that's cold, that's also an issue. And I think in Russia, and if there's any Russians watching this, maybe they confirm it, but they also have an apparatus to preheat that prop hub.
Okay. Interesting. Keith, you were going to add something?
Well, I was just saying, if you're going to force air, and maybe it was already touched on also, if you're going to force air, be sure that you force air through the oil cooler compartment. And one time I was ferrying an airplane cross country, and due to mechanicals and what have you, we ended up overnighting. So I went to the store, bought 2 blow dryers, some extension cords, and some
Must have needed some duct tape.
blankets and stuff like that. Actually, bedspreads, they were cheaper. And then you just wrap the whole thing. One blow dryer went down the oil cooler access port, and then the others went in behind under the gills, like at the bottom. Heat rises up, so down by the landing gear, the nose gear, the other blow dryer went in there, tucked it all in nice and good, including the prop hub.
Okay.
In the whole thing. And then we let those go for about 2 hours, and we stayed right with it, because this was kind of a little off the chart, but stayed right with it. Waited 2 hours at the FBO in there, went out, fired it off. Everything was nice and toasty. Flipped the switch on, you were already seeing temps on the oil. So, and it started great. So if you ever cross country, don't go try to start a cold engine. Go to the store, buy 2 blow dryers. And we were in a Yak 52, so we had no baggage compartment. That, right? So no baggage compartment. So the FBO got the bedspreads, 2 blow dryers, and 2 extension cords. Just left them.
I think I'm not the only one who's guessing that maybe those bedspreads came from that motel you were staying at, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, maybe.
Hey, Stephen Hayne, Colorado, are you doing preheaters at all?
Yeah, we're almost doing exactly what everybody's already described. I hear from folks out, in Lamar and Liberal, Kansas, that they are using these ceramic heaters that you can buy online that aren't too expensive, and then a 6-foot length of that aluminum dryer ducting, and you just aluminum duct tape it to the heater. And for an extra $15 from Home Depot, you can direct the heat wherever you want to. And before I heated my hanger, I would stick it up the oil cooler rather than down, going up from the bottom, and let it rise up through there, and also stick it at the bottom like you do, Keith. And I would find that it would take about a half an hour to the, maybe 20 minutes to the oil cooler is what I would do. And because it's such a small area, and then I'd do another half hour to the engine. But I never did the prop, Jill, so I guess I was missing that one.
Now let me ask you something. We're flying experimental exhibition aircraft, so I do know that you can buy heating pads, from the car racing stores, a lot less expensive than maybe some of the ones that have been mentioned that are approved for aircraft. Do you guys have any sense on, significantly cheaper things, and it's just a heater after all? Yay, no, thumbs up, thumbs down on those?
The Watlow pad that I mentioned they're in all kinds of industries, and if you go to their website, they don't list aviation, but they make custom heat pads, so whatever you need, and there's a wider area you may want on the sump than what's available, so it's kind of nice to use it. So there's a lot out there. Yeah, you could go maybe Summit Racing and some of those websites.
Exactly. Okay, good. And I know that Stephen's been posting on Facebook some of the websites that you guys have been mentioning, some of the products. Any questions that we need to answer, Stephen, on Facebook that we've not answered yet?
The only one I saw that we haven't addressed is, let me scroll up, a different prime from Chris. Hey, Chris, a different prime prop pull procedure. How's that for alliteration? With cold freezing temps?
So cold start you're talking about, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, let's imagine, the engine is, like he said, around 35 degrees. You haven't had a chance to really preheat. You change your prime procedure?
I'd jump in on this one. I've used the old Dennis Every's technique on every type of start, and it's just a good habit pattern, and it starts every time, the first time in cold temperatures. The hardest thing, again, is if you don't get a proper preheat on that oil, it will swing a little bit slower, so you might need to make sure your air is pumped up good. But if you just make sure you got enough gas on both sides, you're not going to get too much gas, and it starts right up every time.
Yeah, I will say on the prime, I don't start until I see gas come out of my drain. And of course, on a colder day, you got to be patient. It might take a little extra prime to see that fuel purge out that congealed oil there. And then that's just how I roll, just to know I'm 100% after I pull oil shut off and a drain. I kind of pretty guaranteed I don't hydro. So that's a little more patience on a colder day for sure.
So the Dennis Every's method is what, in brief?
It's just it's been iterated in many different forms,
Yeah.
but I just go out there and I'll pull the prop through 10, 11 times by hand. Then I go up and then I prime it, and I come back down and pull it through another 6 to 8 times and get the gas, that you pulled through, and then shut off your valve. Make sure you have your throttle cracked open a little bit while you do this, because sometimes in some of the acts I've flown, if the throttle's all the way back for some reason, it's almost like a shut off valve or something. It won't start. So crack the throttle, prime it, and then pull it through the second wave, and it starts up every time.
And Keith, Flipper, you having the same experience?
Yeah. The one thing I would say is BJ Kennemore one time started his up. He's having a hard start. He got up, he primed, he turned, he had and I cannot tell you this. I cannot tell you that he had a intake drain system, but I think he hydro locked his engine on fuel.
Yeah.
Right.
He just kept pumping it and trying to get it to start.
Yeah.
Pumping, tried to get it start. and I think he gulped down a bunch of fuel that was laying in the intake, and boom, hydrolock.
Yeah,
So-
I would agree that, I mean, when I do close the drain, I make sure no more fuel's coming out, that it's
Right.
all gone.
That's
And then
good.
for some reason, that balance to me on a cold day, congealed oil, drain, it's all gone. I stop. Okay, we're done. I close it, maybe
Yep.
give it a few more pulls, and then I'm able to jump in and hit it a couple times on the rotation, and she'll fire. But I would agree. Jill,
Yep.
I don't know. Have you seen that? Is that folklore about a hydrolock with the overprime?
Oh, not at all. And a lot of times what we'll do is just leave the quick drain open while we're priming. And then like you know, you see the fuel, but it's not common, but it's not unheard of. The other thing while we're talking about the intake drains in the system is if that oil is not warmed up and you've got your intake drain system open, with that cold oil, it's less able to drain out. I mean, it's not going to drain out as quickly. And if you've got openings in those drain plugs that are 1/4-inch tubing, and we've set up on intake drain systems now. We've got a kit that's -6 tubing, but you have to be really careful, and that's I'm kind of segueing on condition inspection. I don't think a lot of guys do this, to pull that intake drain system apart and make sure those lines are all clear. We've had 2 instances of a hydraulic lock where there's been some debris in the line, and the owner thought that the drains were clear, in the intake was not clear because the system had a small plug in it. So it's wise to do that, at least at condition inspection. But you know, bear in mind, if that oil is not hot, or warmed, it's gonna take a little bit more time to drain that out. And I wanted to quickly, while I've got you up there, Mitch, Bruce's Custom Covers, that insulated cover, are they making that for the CJ and the Yaks?
That's correct. They have quite a
Oh.
extensive, I can't speak for Yaks, but Nanchang wise, they've really
Okay.
broadened their spectrum of availability for stuff. I mean, they even make a new cover, like if you have a Malcolm hood in the front, a Malcolm hood in the back, and
Yeah.
they're really the cat's pajamas. I was doing the old Hudson's Bay Indian blanket for years, and I was like, wow, let's do this. And yeah, I don't know, it's not cheap. I think they're like $3 or $4 bills, but man, I'm digging it. Really like it.
I can
And
see
put
it's
your
getting
range
dark.
on there.
I can see it's getting dark there where Keith's at. Now we can see you again, buddy. Hey,
I decided to come in the
there's-
house.
So
There's a couple-
a question just before we move on, sorry, Stephen, regarding the intake manifold drain. So I did on my Nanchang, I have an M14P, I did convert it from -4 to -6. And I feel like that's a safer way to make sure that it's draining. So I agree with you. I did talk to Craig Payne, and he said the problem with that is if you ever get a leak in your intake manifold drain, now you're sucking in more air through that system. So it is something definitely at the conditional inspections. I agree. You check it, but you also have to check it for leaks because you've got bigger tubing. Would you agree with that, Jill?
In some respect, yes. What we've seen come in here, we had it wasn't here, it was just here for maintenance. The intake drain, the O-ring on that, the intakes, you could just move the big drain back and forth. So it's definitely leaking there.
Right.
We do see a lot of those the threaded part of that. That's usually a 1/4-inch NPT on that, and it can leak around there. We use a pipe sealant when we do our installs on that. And then where was I going?
Well, we're just talking about the -6. So I guess
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about it too much.
I
I don't know.
where
Is anyone making the stainless steel, threaded caps for that, for people who don't have a good system for the M14? Don't know.
I'm not sure what you mean by caps.
Well, but go on the bottom of the intake drain that you put the plumbing into.
you mean like-
Go ahead, Keith.
No, I wasn't talking.
Oh, okay. We make the intake drain plugs with a 1/4 inch NPT hole.
Okay, that's what I'm talking about. You make them.
We make them. I've put together a kit with all the fittings and hose on that.
Okay.
What I wanted to touch on was Craig's comment on the intake system and leaks. I ran this past with Carl. We were having a discussion about all this, and my opinion was in colder weather, you may experience more induction leaks, especially if you have something that's already marginal. He disagreed with me. But what we do see and I want to, since I have a little bit of an audience on the intake gland nuts at the supercharger, there's a rubber seal under that tooth nut. And the same airplane that had come in for maintenance, we actually turned that nut 1.5 turns before it even made contact with the rubber. But what I want to impress upon you is, I'm assuming that you guys are checking the tightness on those nuts at condition inspection, but there's also, you have to make sure there's a little bit of give in that rubber, that it's still sealing, because if that rubber seal has gotten hard, you're going to have induction leaks, no matter how much you tighten that nut. The other long-term problem is that intake tube, where that seal is, starts to fret, and it wears away the aluminum tubing on there. And the intake tubes, I don't know anyone making those right now. I don't know if Romania is making the intake tube currently, but that's in the long run, that's going to be a problem if people aren't maintaining that properly.
All right, we're now going to get expert advice from the boxer.
Oh,
But he had something to contribute. You guys had such cool things. He came over and helped me.
Awesome. All right, Stephen, was I interrupting you? You were going to add?
well, there was a couple of questions. I'll just throw them into the mix. 2 fuel-related questions. The discussion about priming until fuel comes out the drain. Does it wash the cylinders of oil where we should be worried about? And also priming while the prop is turning. So that's fuel related. And then an oil question is, would love to hear the opinion of Jill and everyone on electric oil priming pumps. Where is it good to pump in and out?
Okay,
So I don't
so
know, fuel and oil.
yeah, so the oil question was what again?
Electric oil priming pumps. I guess these are those pumps that you have seen advertised.
Like a
that-
pre-oiler?
Yes.
Okay.
Assuming you're warm, the pre-oiler might be useful.
So,
So I don't
Jill-
know if it's a winter op thing.
right,
but
so Jill, and everyone else probably knows this, but at the top of the, where the vent is on the top of the case, top of the blower section, my understanding is in winter ops, the Russians were opening that and pouring hot oil. Is that right?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know.
I guess I have heard also, if you heat oil, you can put it in there, and also the vent that's in the front at the nose case. It's a chambered like a P trap. And with your injector, you can slowly get oil down in there, and it will get oil up there to those planetary gears. So it'll get there quicker. And then from the back top of the blower.
Yeah,
So
I thought those
two
were primarily used for a new engine when you're trying to get all the oil into a new engine. That's what Dennis Every showed me to do with a new engine. I'm not sure that just doing a normal preheat wouldn't be just as efficient as trying to dump hot oil down those 2 little dinky holes. You know?
So in the airplane that I fly now actually came from Victoria and then came down to Oregon, and it had a pre-oiler system in it, which was disconnected. but I think the question is having to do with if you're going to install a pre-oiler, is it a good idea? And if so, how do you plumb that? Is anyone familiar with that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on the pre-oiler thing. This is opinion only. I had a pre-oiler on a high compression American aircraft engine, and I was a little more concerned with the sloppy tolerances that we got on these aircraft. I think a pre-oiler is another point of failure, and it's also a huge weight, expense, and I just don't know if anybody could prove to me that it would be a good thing to throw on a yak. I don't know, just a personal opinion.
For the Russians, I mean, their aircraft are out in the field. And so they're dealing with the stone cold engine, oil, airplane, everything. We're all typically coming out of hangars. And I mean, if we get caught out on the tundra or something, yeah, maybe, but don't go fly then. Just stay home.
The thing with the pre-oiler, they really don't work when it's cold. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I used mine when it was extremely hot, and I was worried about expanded metal, and I wanted to get a little bit more oil in there on a hot day. On a cold day, I don't even know if they're going to work at all. But so.
Okay. So let's go to the fuel question. There was a question regarding are we washing too much oil off the cylinders? Jill?
Yes, and my point on having that intake drain open is purely for avoiding that hydraulic lock. Yes, and this kind of ties in with the pre-oiling and that kind of thing. What we do need to remember is that a lot of these engines are now going away from the factory piston and ring package. And everything that was on the M14P, you've got 3 compression rings, an oil control ring, and a bottom scraper. And those top 3 rings have a hard chrome face on the rings. And so they are Russian robust tough. Everything that we're going to now, whether it's Motorstar Romania or Richard Good or Barrett or us or Termicus, everybody is using an aftermarket piston and ring package out of the automotive industry. It's 3 or 4 ring piston. So with that, we need to bear in mind that that's different than what these engines originally came with. And so you do want to avoid washing those cylinders down, with fuel. And the biggest thing on breaking in, and I don't want to get into that tonight, breaking in your engine is keeping those CHTs in the green and really keeping an eye on that.
So I got a question for you. When you are priming your motor, whether it's the traditional pump or some people have converted to electrical pump, where is that spraying that fuel? Is it, my understanding, it's going into the blower section, not into the cylinders. So is that right? And if so, how is that
wash the
cylinder at all?
Yeah.
Well, you're going to get that fuel just draining down into the intakes and out of the supercharger. So that's going to happen. But while you brought up that where that's going, that's a good point. We've had numerous problems with that fitting that primes into in the supercharger case. There's some tiny, like 5 tiny holes in that fitting that actually spray and atomize the fuel. And we have had some issues with that being blocked and not getting the fuel into there. It's kind of an odd problem, but it does happen.
So then it's not going to start, but it's not going to cause damage.
No.
Right. And sometimes, when we use the plunger, so I just put new O-ring on my plunger that you sent me, Jill, and it's a lot stiffer now than it was. So hopefully I'm getting, better action out of it. But it is always, it takes about 3 pumps of kind of weak pumps until I get a solid pump. Is that normal? Is that when the fuel is starting to actually get pushed?
Moving there.
Yeah, it is when the fuel gets pushed. And then also when you do have a full tube, I also think that it matters how hard you push it down.
Yes.
The harder you push it down, like Jill was saying, it atomizes more of that fuel, and it doesn't just end up trickling into the area and not being atomized. So a good solid stroke on the downstroke helps to atomize the fuel, and then the intake picks it up, and that's the formula that you want.
Cool. There was a comment about oil dilute, and I think, Keith, you said, turn it off, don't use it. All the airplanes come with it. What is that doing? Is it actually putting fuel into the oil?
Yes.
And ruining the lubrication? But it was designed by the design bureau for some reason, right?
Yeah, out on the
Tundra.
under their winter conditions. And I don't think any of us have those conditions, or we don't go fly anyway. But in their training purposes and at war, that's a whole different deal. Plus, they're going to use those engines up in 500 hours and send them to the overhaul shop.
Well,
I'm
when I
hoping
flew
to get a little more out.
When I flew my 310 in Northern Canada, I had an oil dilution system on it, and you absolutely had to have it, and because you couldn't easily get the hangers. And yeah, it's exactly like you said. It cost you engine time, and every time you did it, it was you were just backing away from your TVO. So, but that was, that was a required operation in that environment. I wouldn't do it today because I just seek out a hanger.
Good in Siberia, comrade. Good in Siberia.
Edmonton and,
And Edmonton too, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, although listen, my daughter, Jill's from Wisconsin. My daughter just graduated from University of Wisconsin. I've never seen such cold weathers when I would visit her. And it's hard to imagine that it gets, it was -20 when we were there last time and walking on the frozen lake. That's pretty cold. Those are tundra operations.
Yeah.
And we got guys with Nanshangs in Wisconsin too, just like in Michigan, right?
Not as many though.
Yeah. All right, cool.
One thing I'd
yeah.
just throw out there, and supposedly we have these pressure carburetors, and my yak came without any carb heat and never had issues with it. But a buddy of mine, Jack, who we were flying, once in a while we think we get the indications of carb ice, and we've never been able to verify for sure. But the conditions are just perfect, and you know how you pull that power back in the final turn and it starts scaring you, making all those noises. With the carb heat, it's even worse. And I'm sorry, with the potential carb icing, it's even worse. So I don't know, Jill, what you know about the engine, but in my previous pressure carburetor little airplanes, we never worried about carb icing very much. But I do think it can happen. So if you've got a moist, cold day, and it's not dry cold, it's a moist cold, and engine starts running rough, it may be some carb icing. I don't know.
Jill?
Yeah, definitely possible if the conditions are right. We get that question a lot on the carb heat horns. I could tell you on the yaks that probably 85-90% of the yaks do not have those carb heat horns. So the conditions can be right for the carb ice. Yes.
In the 25 years that I've flown these airplanes, I had one situation. Just departed the airport, was at full power. It was probably 40 degrees, and there was a lot of humidity in the air. Got about a mile away from the airport, and it started running rough, turned towards the airport, pulled on the carb heat, and it spit and sputtered a little bit more and then cleared up. That is the one and only time that I've ever suspected carb ice.
I would agree, Keith. I've had mine for about 25, 26 years, and M14P equipped 15 of those years maybe. And I was coming through 8.5, climbing over to Tofino over the Vancouver Island. It wasn't moist, but it was cold. It was clear and cold. And she coughed, and I just cranked it back to somewhere flat, and then carb heat, and it was gone. That's the only time. Yeah. So
Circle the airport and continue the flight.
yeah, I turned around and actually kept going back.
All right, cool. Stephen?
No, I'm just looking, the only other question outstanding here is a recommended replacement time for the intake tubes. You mentioned they get hard and
The
need
seals.
replacement. Yeah, seals,
Seals.
correct.
What you could do is pull an intake tube off, but it's the practical test is to see when you're tightening that intake gland nut, you can feel the give of that rubber if there's any sealing left on it. But if there's any question, I mean, if you've got 500 or 600 hours on the engine, I would definitely pull. Number 7 always runs hotter. That's accessible. You're not. Probably easier than pulling number 5 or 6 intake tube. Those are a pain in the butt. Pull that tube off and just see what condition the seal is in. If it's got a rib worn into it from the nut being against it, and that rubber is just hard, it's time to replace it. And then you'll see on the end of the intake tube, once you pull that seal off, it's bare aluminum. The paint's not there. And you'll see fretting type of corrosion on there if it's been a long time, or even a groove in that intake tube may not seal up even with a new rubber seal on it. I mean, if there's any question, you could send a picture over to us and take a look at it. But just the condition of the rubber, pull that intake tube off and check it.
I've had that nut back out on me and didn't make for a very happy landing once.
Yeah.
And I make it part of my oil change to go through and just give them a little snug and rewire if I have to. But yeah, I've had them back out and get loose, like you say.
Yeah.
And Jill, do you carry those as a set?
Yes.
Okay. Is it this
one piece?
And is it the same for the Husai as for the M14?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good to know, Jill. Yeah, I'll get a set of those for sure.
Mr. Book.
Yeah, I just got a quickie. We're getting back a little bit to the cold weather ops thing. These are things I've learned by doing them wrong myself. We talked about the preheating thing. The forced air preheat is good. There's 2 ways you can do it up here in the north. Guys will run the little electric heaters with the dryer hose, which is a good way. There's also the propane butane torch heaters and a big bullet heater, and I have a bullet heater propane that I got 2 different nozzles on. I can run one into one part of the airplane and one into the other. The only caveat is do not preheat the interior of your airplane with the propane bullet heaters. They contain a lot of moisture, and what they'll do is they'll freeze the inside of your canopy solid with ice, and then you're screwed. It's going to take a long time to get that going. So if you're going to preheat the interior of your yak or CJ, one of those little electric heaters that was talked about earlier, the little ceramic heater, you can just set that inside on your seat on a cushion, close your canopies up and let it blow in there, and it'll toast up things real nice in about 15-20 minutes.
This is low tech. I wasn't able to get it onto my computer, but there's that Bruce's thermal cover on my CJ, and underneath you'll see the Aerotherm. I'm sponsored by Aerotherm. You'll see the Aerotherm little. It's about the size of a rugby ball, football ball, hanging down there, and it goes in the back, and there you go.
All right, so we've got to check our balls and check our nuts and make sure everything's tight. Question for you.
Whoa.
What about, nothing that I said was inappropriate, Mitch. What about closing off the intake to the oil cooler? I know that the Yak 52s have a device that you can put on there. I've seen some people, oh, here we go. So can we talk about that for a second? Is that a good idea if you're in cold weather?
Yep.
Well, I use this, and I must say that when it's lower than probably 50 degrees here in Colorado, I put this in, and it has a sliding, I don't know if it's going to come through, but it's got a sliding door that allows you to choose how big this aperture is. And so I'll leave it at this size, and my oil will still cool well, even when it's at temperature, but then it'll also, I can keep it hotter when I close the door. And then if it's really cold, which I have gone out when it's, 20 degrees once, I will slide this door. It's not coming through very well, but I'll slide the door so it's covering half and just leave a, very little slit. And that seems to work. The yaks have them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the yaks came from the factory with a set of 3 louvers, and one completely blocked off the oil cooler, and there was a set of temperature ranges on those. I don't have that right handy. John Warwick with the Yak collection, he does have at least one louver that he sells for the Yak 52 oil cooler. I would caution against using duct tape on the oil cooler, because that adhesive off the duct tape gets really gooey, and it can create just a mess and block off some of that airflow if it leaves adhesive behind, and it's just a real mess. So I wouldn't use the duct tape method.
Before I was able to source one of these, I did use duct tape on the fairing, and 200-mile-an-hour tape, of course, and block it off by about a half, and that seemed to work temporarily.
You've also
you got to have those, because when it's below 50 degrees out for a high of the day up here in Michigan, I put my solid one on. It completely blocks my complete opening on that, and I still run cool on my temperatures. So I you can put a piece of cardboard in there. You can do a lot of things, but to get one of these, they're nice. They're custom fit, and there's some little clip pins that hold them in place. No glue, no tape. But if you're going to be flying around when it's 10, 20, 30 degrees, you got to have that, or you'll never get your oil up in the green. You'll never get it in the green.
Cool. Well, listen, I want to wrap this up. I think this has been actually a wonderful discussion. I'm so glad to have all you guys here, because as I said in the beginning, I'm sitting here at 90 degrees in Southern California. Cold weather ops just they just don't happen. We don't have to deal with this, but a lot of people do. So I'm really appreciative. So let's just go round robin. This is like the Brady Bunch here. It looks like on my screen with you guys in different squares, and maybe a closing comment, and then we'll wrap it up. So Mitch.
I thank you, Gil, for organizing this, first of all, and everybody for joining in. I think it's great that we should do this quarterly or something and communicate with each other on various topics. And this is a important one, because not most of us, but a number of us live in colder climates, and you're going to add a lot of life and love to your engine doing this. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you. Keith?
I think we touched, and it is very important, is to block those oil coolers, or you're never going to get up.
Somebody behind you, Keith.
Yeah. I have kids here. That's their dog too. I just borrowed him.
Yeah.
Anyway, blocking off those oil coolers, and be sure to heat oil coolers, sumps, and tank. And
That's great.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hall, Booker?
The last thing, when you're doing that warm up and you're looking down at your oil pressure gauge, even though it looks like it's at 0, if you have oil pressure, it'll be a little bit above the 0 tick. If it's below the 0 tick, you blew a hose, and you probably don't have oil pressure. So watch it.
All right.
Good point.
Stephen?
Nope, I think we touched on everything.
Awesome.
For
And
me.
last, but certainly not least, Miss Jill.
Thank you. A couple things. Oil dilution. I'm with Keith. We don't use it. We disable it. if you're bent on it, read the manual on how to set that up. Don't use an oil dipstick heater and type of heater, put that in the oil tank. Lesson learned, caught on fire. That was a long time ago back in Vermont.
Wow.
And then quickly on, make sure your battery is up for cold weather ops, because if it's down low, we get calls all the time. People can't start. And it's the booster coil doesn't have enough to energize, and you're not going to be able to start your airplane. So make sure the battery's in good condition. And then I guess dress appropriately. We don't need to segue into what to wear in cold weather ops, but thank you for arranging this, Gil. I think this is very helpful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for taking an hour out of your day to help us with your experience and expertise. I will remind everybody that the fall raffle is on. It's a $500 gift certificate. So guess how many tickets we've sold? Yes, 42. Only 42 tickets for a $500 gift certificate, and the tickets are only $20. 4 days left. Buy a ticket, support the RPA. We support you, and we'll see you again. Thanks everybody so much.
All right.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye,
See ya.
Keith. Bye.